The front door opened, and Evan stopped, like the house had rejected him. He didn't step inside right away. His hand was still on the handle suitcase, tilted awkwardly behind him, as if something invisible had pushed back. His eyes moved first, slow searching, taking in the living room, like he was trying to match it to a memory that no longer existed. Everything was wrong. Not broken, not damaged, just wrong. The couch was clean. Not just picked up, but actually clean. The throw blankets folded, the cushions aligned, like no one had sunk into them in weeks. The coffee table was empty, except for a single ceramic bowl centered. No bottles, no burp cloths, no half-finished takeout containers, stacked like quiet evidence of survival. The house didn't smell like exhaustion anymore. It smelled like lemon. Evan took a step forward, then another, slower this time. His shoes made a faint sound against the hardwood, too loud, in a space that had no background noise to absorb it. No television humming, no music, no baby crying. That was what made him freeze. He turned his head sharply toward the window. The bassinet was still there. Same spot. Same pale yellow blanket, tucked neatly around a small sleeping shape. Their daughter, Emma. Her chest rose and fell in soft, steady rhythm, untouched by the tension that had just walked through the door. Evan let out a breath that didn't quite finish. No, he murmured, barely audible, like he was speaking to himself more than to anyone else. This isn't, his voice trailed off. Because it was. Against the far wall, stacked with quiet precision, were boxes. 5 of them. Maybe 6. All the same size. All sealed. All labeled in neat, unmistakable handwriting. Winter clothes, college books, tax records. Evan's gaze snapped from one to the next faster now, like he was looking for something that would tell him this was temporary. A mistake, a phase, something he could smooth over with a joke or a half apology. But nothing in that room felt temporary. It felt decided. He dropped the suitcase. It hit the floor with a dull thud that sounded louder than it should have. That was when he saw the table. The dining table sat in the center of the room, bathed in the flat, honest light of a Tuesday afternoon. On it were 3 clean stacks of paper, each held down by the same ceramic bowl that used to live cluttered with keys and receipts. Printed pages. Organized, aligned, deliberate. Evan took one step toward it, then stopped again. Because he wasn't alone. I didn't think you'd come in that slowly. Hannah's voice came from the kitchen. Calm, even, not raised, not shaking. Just steady. He turned. She was leaning lightly against the counter, arms folded, not defensive, not closed off, just anchored. Her posture wasn't the one he remembered from a month ago. There was no exhaustion pulling her shoulders forward, no frantic energy, no waiting. Hannah Cole, his wife, stood there like she belonged to herself. She wasn't crying. She wasn't asking where he'd been. She wasn't even looking at him like he was the center of anything. For a second, Evan just stared at her like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. What happened here? He asked, finally, his voice thin, stretched tight between confusion and something sharper. Hannah didn't answer right away. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything that hadn't been said while he was gone. She shifted her weight slightly, her gaze moving past him, for just a moment to the door still open behind him, sunlight spilling in like an invitation he no longer knew how to accept. Then she looked back at him, and in that look there was no anger, just distance. You really don't know, she said quietly. Evan swallowed, his eyes flicking again to the boxes, the papers, the spotless room, the sleeping baby, who had somehow grown in his absence, without asking permission. No, he said, and for the first time since he'd walked in, it sounded like the truth. Hannah nodded once, almost to herself. Then we should probably start with the night you left, she said. It had been a Thursday night when Evan said he couldn't breathe in his own house anymore. The kitchen light was too bright for how late it was, casting a flat, yellow glow over everything. The sink full of bottles, the folded but never put away laundry, the small shape of Emma, asleep in her bassinet, just a few feet away. Hannah stood at the counter, one hand braced against it, the other resting protectively near the edge of the bassinet, as if proximity alone could keep everything from unraveling. Her body still didn't feel like it belonged to her. 3 weeks after giving birth, every movement carried a quiet reminder: tightness, soreness, a fatigue that didn't lift no matter how many times she sat down. Sleep came in fragments, rarely longer than an hour at a time. Meals were something she remembered she needed after it was already too late. Evan sat at the table, his phone in his hand, thumb moving in slow, absent swipes. "I can't do this," he said finally. At first, Hannah thought he meant the crying, or the tension, or the fact that their lives had shrunk to a cycle of feeding, changing, and trying not to fall apart in between. She turned slightly toward him. "Do what?" He didn't answer right away. He set his phone down, but not fully, just enough that it rested on the table, still within reach. "This," he said again, gesturing vaguely toward the room. "This life. I feel like I'm disappearing in here." The words didn't land all at once. They came in pieces, low enough for her to almost misunderstand them. "You mean it's been hard?" she asked carefully. He shook his head. "No, I mean I need space." That was when something inside her went still. Emma shifted softly in the bassinet, a small sound escaping her, as if she sensed the change in the air. Hannah instinctively reached down, resting her hand lightly on the blanket until the movement settled. "Space," she repeated, quieter now. Evan leaned back in his chair, exhaling like he had been holding that word in for days. "The guys are planning a trip," he said. "Europe, Spain, Italy, maybe Greece. A few weeks, just to reset." Hannah stared at him, waiting for the part where he explained why he was telling her this. It didn't come. "You're thinking about going?" she asked. "I already booked it." The sentence landed with a kind of clarity that left no room for interpretation. Hannah felt her grip tighten slightly on the edge of the bassinet when she asked, "Next Monday, 4 days." She let that number sit between them, heavy and unmoving. "I just had your baby," she said. Not accusing, not loud, just stating something that felt like it should matter. Evan's expression didn't change much. If anything, it settled into something calmer, more resolved. "I know," he said, "and that's exactly why I need to do this now. Before things get worse. Before I start resenting everything." The word hung there longer than it should have. Hannah glanced down at Emma, at the tiny fingers curled against the blanket, at the small, steady rise and fall of her chest. "Everything. You're talking about leaving us," she said. "I'm talking about taking care of my mental health," Evan replied, his tone sharpening just slightly. "People do this all the time. Not like this," she wanted to say. "Not when there's a newborn in the next room. Not when the person you promised to build a life with can barely stand without pain." But the words didn't come out the way they sounded in her head. They came out softer. "Can you wait?" she asked. "Just a little, a couple of months, or go for a shorter trip. My mom could come help, or we could—" "It's already set," he interrupted. Not harsh, just final. The conversation didn't end in a fight. That was the strange part. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, just a quiet understanding, settling into the space between them, that something had already been decided without her. Later that night, Hannah stood on the porch with Emma tucked against her chest, wrapped in a thin blanket against the cool Denver air. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every distant car sound louder than it should. Inside, Evan moved around the house, finishing small things, zipping a bag, checking his phone, moving through their shared space, like he was already halfway gone. Hannah didn't follow him. She stood there, feeling the slow, steady weight of her daughter against her, and tried to make sense of the idea that the person she had trusted to stand beside her had chosen to step away instead. When he finally came out, he kissed Emma's forehead gently, like nothing about this moment was unusual. "I'll call," he said. Hannah nodded, not because she believed it would change anything, but because at that moment she didn't know what else to do. As the car pulled away, its red taillights fading at the end of the street, Hannah remained on the porch a few seconds longer than she needed to. Emma's heartbeat fluttered softly against her chest. Inside the house, everything was exactly where it had been. And yet something had already shifted. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have answers. Only a quiet, growing awareness that whatever came next, she would be facing it without him. The first night alone didn't feel real until 3:12 a.m. That was when Emma started crying, in a way Hannah had never heard before. Not the soft, restless fussing she had learned to calm with a slow sway or a gentle hum, but something sharper, urgent, continuous, like the sound itself was trying to break through the walls. Hannah was already awake. She had been awake in pieces since Evan left that afternoon. She moved toward the bassinet. On instinct, her body slow to respond, but already in motion before her thoughts caught up. The room felt smaller at night, the shadows pressing in closer, the quiet amplifying every sound Emma made. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice didn't sound convincing, even to herself. She lifted Emma carefully, adjusting her hold, when a sharp pull in her abdomen reminded her she still wasn't healed. The baby's cries didn't stop right away. They pressed against Hannah's chest, vibrating through both of them. Minutes stretched, then an hour, then more. By the time the crying softened into exhausted whimpers, Hannah was sitting on the edge of the couch, barefoot, shoulders slumped, Emma finally still against her. The house was silent again. Too silent. She glanced toward the front door, without meaning to, as if part of her expected it to open, expected footsteps, expected someone else to step in and take over for just a moment. It didn't. The space Evan had occupied wasn't just empty. It stayed empty. The next morning, or what counted as morning, came without any clear boundary. Light filtered through the window, pale and thin, and Hannah realized she couldn't remember the last time she had eaten something that required more than one hand. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She didn't reach for it right away. Emma was finally asleep again, her small body curled into the soft curve of the bassinet. Hannah watched her for a moment longer, as if confirming she would stay that way, before picking up the phone. A photo, blue water, bright sunlight, a glass on a table condensation catching the light. Evan, no message at first, just the image. Then, a few seconds later, the text appeared beneath it. "Wish you were here." Hannah stared at the screen longer than she needed to. Behind her, the sink was still full. A bottle sat unwashed on the counter. The air carried the faint sour smell of milk that had dried before she had time to notice it. She looked back down at the phone. "Wish you were here." The words didn't match the room she was standing in. She typed slowly, her thumb hesitating between each word. She barely slept. "I'm exhausted." The message sent. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. When his reply finally came, it was shorter. "Try to relax. Stress isn't good for the baby." Hannah let out a sound that almost resembled a laugh, but didn't quite reach that far. She set the phone down without responding. The day moved forward in fragments, feeding, changing, rocking, sitting, standing, forgetting why she had stood in the first place, remembering too late. At some point in the afternoon, she realized she hadn't showered in 2 days. At some point later, she realized she didn't care. The hours blurred together, measured less by the clock and more by Emma's needs. When she cried, when she slept, when she needed to be held just to stay calm. That evening, Hannah found herself back on the couch, Emma resting against her shoulder, the room dim, except for a single lamp. Her phone buzzed again. Another photo. This one of Evan's smiling arm slung casually around someone just out of frame. The kind of smile that came easily, without effort. The kind she hadn't seen directed at her in weeks. No explanation, no context, just another small window into a life that seemed to be moving forward without interruption. Hannah didn't open the message thread this time. She didn't need to. She already knew what it would look like. Images, short replies, distance disguised as normalcy. For the first time since he had left, a thought formed with enough weight to stay. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. This wasn't temporary. She looked around the room, the bassinet, the scattered items. She hadn't had the energy to put away the quiet pressing in again, and felt something shift almost imperceptibly. Not strength, not yet, but awareness, the kind that settles in slowly, like a truth you didn't want, but could no longer ignore. Emma stirred softly against her shoulder. Hannah adjusted her hold automatically, her movements more certain now than they had been even the day before. Outside, a car passed its headlights, sliding briefly across the wall before disappearing. Inside, nothing changed, except the understanding that whatever this was, it wasn't something she could wait out. By the 8th day, the messages had started to blur together. Not because there were too many, because they were all the same. Hannah sat at the small dining table, Emma asleep in the bassinet nearby, the late afternoon light stretching thin across the floor. Her phone rested in front of her, the screen dimming and lighting again as new notifications came in. Another photo, another short caption, another version of a life that didn't include her. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she scrolled up, all the way to the beginning. Back to the first message she had sent after Evan left, long, detailed, careful. Updates about Emma, about the nights, about the pain she didn't quite know how to describe, but felt in everything she did. She had told herself she was keeping him informed. Now, looking at it, she saw something else. She saw herself asking to be seen. The messages continued. Paragraphs from her side, fragments from his. A beach, a drink, a miss you, a try to rest. She kept scrolling. Her thumb moved slower the further back she went, as if the pace itself mattered now. As if she needed to see every piece clearly, without the blur of exhaustion softening the edges. Emma stirred softly in the bassinet, a small sound that pulled Hannah's attention for a moment. She looked over, waited until the baby settled again, then returned to the screen. There was a message from the 3rd day. She hadn't remembered that one clearly. I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time. I feel like I'm falling apart. She read it once, then again. Below it, Evan's response. You'll get the hang of it. Just don't overthink everything. Hannah let out a slow breath. Not sharp, not angry, just empty. She kept reading. Another message. I think something's wrong with me. I can't stop crying. His reply came hours later. It's probably hormones. You'll be fine. The words beat on the screen unchanged, but something about them felt heavier now than it had when she first read them. At the time, she had explained them away. He didn't understand. He was distracted. He would be different when he got back. Now, sitting in the quiet of her own home, she didn't reach for those explanations. She just read, and for the first time, she didn't feel the urge to respond. The realization didn't come all at once. It settled in slowly, like a weight redistributing itself. He wasn't coming back to help her. He was coming back to something he expected to still be there. There was a difference. Hannah locked her phone and set it down on the table. The room didn't change. The bassinet was still in the same place. The dishes still needed to be done. The quiet still pressed in. But something inside her shifted almost too subtle to name. Not strength, not yet, but direction. She stood up carefully, her body still reminding her of its limits, and moved toward the kitchen. The sink was full again, bottles, small utensils, things that had accumulated without asking permission. For a moment, she just looked at it. Then she reached for the faucet. The sound of running water filled the space, steady and consistent. It was the first continuous sound in the house that didn't come from Emma. Hannah washed one bottle, then another, not quickly, not with urgency, just methodically. Each movement small, contained, repeatable, something she could finish. Across the room, her phone buzzed again. She didn't turn around. The water kept running. The rhythm didn't break. For the first time since Evan had left, she wasn't reacting to what came through that screen. She was doing something that belonged entirely to her. When she finished, she dried her hands on a towel, and glanced briefly toward the table. The phone had gone still again. No urgency, no pull. Hannah walked back over, picked it up, and without opening the message, turned it face down. Emma stirred once more, a soft searching sound. Hannah moved to her side, immediately, lifting her with a familiarity that hadn't been there a week ago. The motion was smoother now, more certain, even if it still carried traces of exhaustion. "It's okay," she murmured again. This time it sounded different, not because the words had changed, because something behind them had. As Emma settled against her, Hannah looked past the bassinet, past the small, contained space of the room, and toward the rest of the house. Everything was still in place, but it no longer felt like something she was waiting to be rescued inside. It felt like something she would have to manage. The thought didn't scare her the way it might have a few days ago. It didn't comfort her either. It just stayed. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion, beneath the quiet, a new question began to form. Not about when Evan would come back, or what he would say when he did, but about what exactly would still be there for him when he did. The first time Hannah opened their banking app after Evan left, she did it with Emma asleep across her lap, and one hand still resting protectively over the baby's back. It was a Tuesday morning, bright and cool, outside the kind of clear Denver day that made the sky look almost artificial. Inside the house, the dishwasher hummed softly, and for a few rare minutes, nothing urgent was crying. Hannah had not gone looking for a fight. She had gone looking for numbers, diapers, formula as backup, even though she was still trying to nurse, groceries, the electric bill, the pediatrician visit coming up next week, hospital charges that had already started arriving in clean white envelopes she kept stacking on the far end of the counter, because opening them required more steadiness than she had most days. She logged in slowly, careful not to jostle Emma. For a second, the screen looked ordinary. Then it didn't. The checking balance sat lower than she expected. Not ruined, not empty, but lower in a way that made her stomach tighten before her mind had fully caught up. Hannah blinked, then opened the transaction history. A hotel in Barcelona, a dinner charge in Nice, a boat excursion off the coast of Amalfi. She stared at the screen, reading each line twice, then a third time, because something about the clean, casual way the charges were listed made them harder to absorb. They looked like any other purchases: gas, utilities, coffee. Except they weren't. They were proof. Proof that while she had been timing feedings and counting sleep in fragments, Evan had been using the account they both depended on, as if fatherhood were something he could step away from with a boarding pass. Emma shifted against her, making a small sound. Hannah pressed her hand more gently over the baby's back until she settled again. Then she kept scrolling. Restaurants, train tickets, another hotel, drinks. One charge alone was more than they had spent on groceries in 2 weeks. On the counter, one of the unopened hospital envelopes seemed suddenly louder than everything else in the room. Hannah set her jaw and opened the savings tab. Mostly his direct deposits. That had always been true. Evan had made more money as a regional sales manager than she did handling scheduling and billing for a dental office before maternity leave. For years, that difference had felt like math, a practical arrangement inside a marriage. Now it looked different. Now it looked like vulnerability. She didn't cry. That surprised her more than anything. A week earlier, this would have sent her straight into panic. Would have had her texting him, apologizing for sounding upset before she even explained why. Would have left her trying to phrase basic survival like a reasonable request. Instead, she sat very still and looked at the numbers until they stopped feeling personal and started feeling structural. Rent due in 12 days. Insurance autopay in 6. Utilities pending. She knew exactly what would happen if she did nothing. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just one missed bill, then another. A late fee, a thinner margin, less room for diapers, less room for choice. For the first time since Evan walked out, Hannah felt something harder than hurt move into place. Not rage, responsibility. Emma deserved stability more than Evan deserved the benefit of the doubt. That thought came cleanly, without noise. And once it arrived, it did not leave. Carefully, so carefully, it almost felt ceremonial. Hannah shifted Emma into the bassinet and reached for the folder where she had started tucking away mail. Then she sat back down, reopened the app, and moved enough money into a new household checking account to cover rent, food, diapers, utilities, and a small emergency cushion. Not everything, only what the next month required. Her hands trembled a little as she typed, but she did not stop. When the transfer finished, she opened the note field and wrote one sentence: moved funds for household and baby expenses while you're away. Nothing dramatic, nothing hidden, nothing she would have to defend later by claiming confusion. Just the truth. She stared at the confirmation screen for a long moment after it was done. There it was, a line, quiet, legal, real, not a threat, not revenge, a refusal. For the rest of the day, the house looked the same. The bottles still needed washing. Emma still woke hungry. The hospital envelopes were still waiting. But under all of it, something fundamental had changed. Hannah was no longer only enduring what had been done to her. She had acted. And whether Evan understood that yet or not, the life he expected to return to had just begun slipping out of his hands. Hannah almost didn't hear the knock. It was late afternoon, the kind of quiet hour where time seemed to stretch between feedings. Emma had finally fallen asleep after a restless morning, and Hannah had lowered herself carefully onto the couch, not to rest exactly, but to pause. The knock came again, gentle, not impatient. She hesitated before standing one hand instinctively, bracing her side as she crossed the room. The house was still the kind of stillness that made any interruption feel larger than it was. When she opened the door, the woman standing there looked like she had been part of the neighborhood longer than the houses themselves. "Hi there," she said, her voice calm, steady. "I'm Margaret Carter. I live 2 doors down." Hannah recognized her, then the woman who walked every morning in white sneakers, always with purpose, even when she had nowhere obvious to be. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Margaret continued, her eyes flicking briefly past Hannah into the house. "Not intrusive, just observant. I saw your husband leave last week. Haven't seen him come back." There was no judgment in the statement, just fact. Hannah shifted slightly, suddenly aware of how she must look. Hair pulled back without much thought, an old sweatshirt, the faint shadow of exhaustion she no longer bothered trying to hide. "He's traveling," she said. Margaret nodded once, as if that confirmed something she had already suspected. "And you're here with the baby," she said gently. It wasn't a question. Hannah didn't answer right away, because answering would make it real, in a way that thinking it hadn't quite managed to. Emma stirred faintly in the other room, a soft sound that traveled easily through the quiet house. Margaret's expression softened. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the inside. Hannah hesitated for half a second, then stepped aside. Margaret moved with quiet efficiency, the kind that didn't draw attention to itself. She washed her hands without being told where the sink was, dried them, and approached the bassinet with a familiarity that suggested she had done this many times before. "Hello there," she murmured softly, lifting Emma with practiced ease. The baby didn't cry. That alone felt like something Hannah hadn't experienced in days. "You should sit," Margaret said over her shoulder. Hannah obeyed before she had time to question it. She sank back onto the couch, her body responding to the permission more than the words themselves. "I'm a retired nurse," Margaret added, settling into a chair with Emma resting calmly against her shoulder. 40 years, most of that in pediatrics. That explained the steadiness, the confidence, the way Emma seemed to recognize something safe in her hold. "You're not meant to do this alone," Margaret said after a moment. Hannah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I know," she said quietly. Margaret glanced at her, not unkindly. Knowing and planning are 2 different things. The words landed differently than the others Hannah had heard over the past week. They didn't comfort, they clarified. Margaret shifted Emma slightly, patting her back in a slow, rhythmic motion. "Have you been keeping track of things?" she asked. Things Hannah repeated. Dates, messages, expenses. Anything that shows what's happening while he's gone. Hannah's mind flickered briefly to the banking app, to the charges, to the note she had left. "A little," she said. Margaret nodded. "Good, do more of it." There was no urgency in her tone, just certainty. "Not because you're trying to make trouble," she continued, "because you need to understand your position and protect it." Protect. The word settled somewhere deeper than Hannah expected. Across the room, the stack of unopened hospital envelopes seemed to draw her attention again. Margaret followed her gaze without turning her head. "Those don't go away if you ignore them," she said. "I know. Then you open them when you're ready," Margaret replied. "But you don't pretend they're not there." Emma shifted, then settled again, her breathing steady. The house felt different with another adult in it. Not louder, just less fragile. Margaret stayed for less than an hour, long enough to make Hannah a plate of scrambled eggs and toast she didn't remember agreeing to eat. Long enough to show her how to adjust Emma's hold to ease the strain on her own body. Long enough to leave something behind that hadn't been there before. Structure. At the door before she left, Margaret paused. "You're doing better than you think," she said. "But that doesn't mean you stop paying attention." Hannah nodded. "I won't." Margaret studied her for a moment, then gave a small approving nod. "Good," she said. "Because men like your husband don't always realize what they've done until there's something they can't undo." The door closed softly behind her. The house returned to its quiet. But it wasn't the same quiet. Hannah walked back to the table where her phone lay face down, untouched. Next to it, she placed a small notebook she hadn't used in years. For a moment, she just looked at it. Then she opened it. At the top of the first page, she wrote the date. Below it, one line. "Evan left." She paused, then added another. "Expenses since departure." Her handwriting was steady, more steady than she felt. Across the room, Emma made a small sound, then settled again. Hannah kept writing. Not quickly, not emotionally, just deliberately. For the first time, what was happening wasn't just something she was living through. It was something she was recording, and that made it real in a different way. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just after 9. Hannah had just finished feeding Emma and was sitting at the kitchen table, the small notebook open in front of her, pages beginning to fill with dates, numbers, and short, precise notes. Her phone buzzed against the wood. "Evan." For a moment, she didn't move. "Buonanotte." Then she picked it up. "Hey," she said. There was a pause on the other end, longer than usual, like he was recalibrating something. "Hey," Evan replied. His voice sounded different, not softer, not warmer, just tighter. "I've been trying to reach you." Hannah glanced at the notebook. There were missed calls, yes, but not many. "I've been busy," she said. Another pause. With the baby, she added not as an excuse, but as a fact. "Right," he said quickly. "Yeah, I figured." There was background noise. Behind him, voices, distant laughter, the echo of a place that didn't belong to her life. "I just checked the account." He continued, his tone shifting slightly. "Why is there less money than I expected?" Hannah didn't answer immediately. She looked at the line she had written the night before transfer essentials. "Because I moved what we needed," she said calmly. "Bills, groceries, medical." There was a sharper pause this time. "You didn't tell me you were doing that," Evan said. "I didn't know I needed permission to pay for diapers and electricity," she replied. Silence. "Not empty charged." "That's not what I meant," he said finally. But the edge in his voice hadn't disappeared. "It's just, we should be making those decisions together." Hannah let that sit. Together. The word felt misplaced. "You made your decision without me," she said evenly. Another silence. Longer. Then a shift. "Okay," Evan said, his tone adjusting again, softer now, but less stable. "Look, I get that you're stressed. I need you to not make big financial moves without talking to me first." Hannah's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the notebook. She didn't close it. "I'm tracking everything," she said. "You can see it when you get back." "That's not really the point," he replied quickly. No, she thought. It wasn't. "What is the point, Evan?" she asked. There was a sound on his end, like he'd stepped away from wherever he had been. "The point is," he said, lowering his voice, "I don't want things getting complicated." Complicated. Hannah felt something shift inside her. Not sharply, but definitively. "They already are," she said. He exhaled a short breath that sounded more like frustration than fatigue. "Can we not do this right now?" he said. "I'm calling to check in, not argue." Hannah looked around the kitchen. At the unopened envelopes, at the bassinet, at the quiet. "You're not checking in," she said. "You're checking control." The words came out before she softened them. On the other end, silence. Then colder this time. "That's not fair," Evan said. Hannah didn't respond. Because fairness had stopped being the right measure a while ago. "I'll call you later," he added after a moment. "When things are calmer." The line went dead before she could answer. Hannah lowered the phone slowly. Emma stirred in the bassinet, a small movement that drew her attention back into the room. For a few seconds, everything felt suspended. Then the phone buzzed again. Not a call, a notification. She glanced down. A banking alert. Large withdrawal flagged for review. Her stomach tightened. She opened the app. The number on the screen didn't match what she had recorded the night before. Another withdrawal. Not hers. Her eyes moved quickly across the transaction details. Location overseas. Time early morning local. Evan. Hannah sat very still. The notebook was still open in front of her. For a moment, she just looked at the empty space beneath her last entry. Then she picked up her pen. Her hand didn't shake. She wrote the date. Below it carefully, precisely. Unauthorized withdrawal overseas. She paused. Then added, amount exceeds agreed usage. The words felt clinical, deliberate, necessary. Across the room, Emma made a soft sound, then settled again. Hannah closed the notebook this time. Not abruptly, but with intention. The conversation hadn't just revealed tension. It had revealed direction. Whatever this was becoming, it wasn't something she could navigate by reacting anymore. She would have to be ahead of it, because for the first time, the risk wasn't just emotional. It was measurable, and it was growing. Hannah did not call the bank that same minute. That surprised her. A week earlier, she would have reacted from fear, heart-racing voice, shaking trying to explain the situation, before she fully understood it herself. But by Wednesday morning, with Emma finally asleep, after a long pre-dawn feeding, Hannah knew panic would only scatter the pieces. She needed them arranged. The notebook lay open beside her coffee mug. Its pages no longer looking temporary. Dates, charges, notes from calls, small details that had seemed almost obsessive when she first wrote them down, now looked like the outline of something solid. The overseas withdrawal from the day before sat there in careful handwriting, followed by the timestamp and amount. Hannah read it again. Then she turned back 2 pages and looked at the first transfer she had made for rent, groceries, utilities, and baby supplies. The difference between the 2 entries was so obvious it almost felt insulting. Hers had been measured, documented, necessary. His had been larger, faster, and done after he already knew money had been moved for the household. That mattered. Not emotionally, structurally. Emma made a small sound from the bassinet, and Hannah glanced over automatically. The baby settled without fully waking. Outside, the light had shifted into the clear, bright sharpness of late morning. The kind of ordinary day that made serious decisions feel strangely exposed. By noon, Margaret was at the kitchen table with her reading glasses low on her nose, looking over the notebook without touching it. "You've got a pattern now," she said. Hannah looked up. "A pattern." Margaret nodded. "Not just bad behavior. Sequence. He leaves. He minimizes. He checks the money. Then he escalates when he realizes you're not just waiting around." The words landed with more force than Hannah expected, because that was exactly what it had felt like. But she hadn't said it that clearly, even to herself. Margaret tapped one finger lightly on the page near the most recent withdrawal. "He's not confused," she said. "He's testing." Hannah felt that settle into place. Testing. Not whether she was hurt, not whether she was coping, whether she would hold the line. For a few seconds, the room was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and Emma's soft breathing. Then, Hannah reached for her phone. This time, she called the bank. The woman who answered sounded calm and practiced the way people do when they've spent years talking others through the moments that feel larger on one end of the line than the other. Hannah did not rush. She gave the dates, the amounts, the overseas location, and the note attached to her own transfer. She asked what could be flagged, what could be documented, and what would happen if additional withdrawals kept appearing. Not what should happen. What would? The answer was slower than panic would have liked, but steadier. The bank could place extra monitoring on the account note, her concern, and require additional verification for unusual activity. It would not freeze everything immediately. It would not hand her control. But it created friction. And right now, friction mattered. After the call, Hannah sat for a long moment with the phone in her hand. No dramatic music, no instant victory, just process. It was enough. That afternoon, she took out a fresh folder and began sorting the papers she had been stacking in uneven piles. Bank statements, printed screenshots of Evan's messages, hospital bills, a handwritten list of household expenses. She did not arrange them by emotion. She arranged them by clarity. What he knew, what he spent, what she covered, what changed after he noticed. The pattern grew more visible the more she handled it. By the time Emma woke and let out a hungry cry, the folder was thick enough to close with resistance. Hannah lifted her daughter, settled into the chair by the window, and fed her while looking out at the street. Nothing dramatic was happening outside. A delivery truck passed. Someone walked a golden retriever. Life kept moving with the indifference it always had. Inside, though, something had shifted again. Not because the problem was solved, because it had shape now. She no longer needed Evan to admit what he was doing in order to understand it. And once she understood it, she could prepare for his return without guessing. Late that evening, after Emma was asleep and the house had gone quiet again, Hannah wrote one final line in the notebook. If he comes back expecting the same house, he needs to see the truth first. She looked at the sentence for a long time. Then she closed the notebook and set it beside the new folder. The response she was building would not be loud. It would not be chaotic. And it would not depend on him agreeing with it. It would depend on whether she could make the truth impossible to step around. Evan came home on a Tuesday afternoon, just after 2, at exactly the time his text the night before had said he would. Landing at 2, home by 3. Hope Emma's awake. Hannah had read it once and not answered. Now, standing at the kitchen counter, with the house quiet around her, she could hear the rideshare door shut outside before she heard his key in the lock. Emma was asleep in the bassinet by the window, one hand curled near her cheek, her breathing soft and even. The house smelled faintly of lemon and soup simmering on low heat. Nothing in it looked chaotic anymore. Nothing looked abandoned. That was the point. The key turned. The door opened, and Evan stepped inside, expecting recognition. Instead, he found order. He stopped so abruptly, the suitcase clipped the threshold behind him. His eyes moved first across the living room, then to the dining table, then the far wall where the boxes stood in clean, silent rows. Winter clothes, books, personal files, shoes. The labels were hers, neat, undeniable. For a second, he said nothing. The color in his face shifted almost visibly, draining not from anger, but from disorientation. He looked like a man who had rehearsed a reunion and walked into an inventory. "What is this?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Hannah stayed where she was, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the counter. "It's the month you left," she said. He stared at her, then at the table. There were 3 stacks of paper laid out in front of an empty chair. The first was bank statements, several entries marked with yellow tabs. The second was printed screenshots of their messages. The third was a plain, handwritten list of household expenses, rent, utilities, groceries, diapers, pediatrician copay, postpartum medication, formula backup. On top of all 3 sat the small black notebook. Evan took 2 slow steps toward it. "Hannah," he said. And now there was strain under the name. "What did you do?" The question hung there for a moment. Not what happened. What did you do? Hannah watched that land inside herself and settle. "I paid for this house," she said. "I tracked what you spent. I spoke to the bank. I stopped pretending this was temporary." He looked down at the papers again and picked up one of the statements. His eyes moved quickly over the highlighted lines. Barcelona. Nice. Amalfi. Overseas withdrawal. The transfer note she had left for household and baby expenses. His jaw tightened. "You called the bank?" he asked. "I documented unusual activity on a shared account," she replied. "That's not the same thing. It is when one person is in Europe, spending family money, after being told we needed it here." his head lifted sharply at that. "I was not spending family money recklessly," he said. "The first real edge, breaking through, I used my card. I took one extra withdrawal. One after you called, because you saw I had moved what Emma and I needed." Silence. Not confusion this time. Recognition. He set the statement down too quickly, then reached for the printed messages, as if they might somehow help him. They didn't. There was his photo of blue water, his caption, his reply telling her to relax, his hours-late dismissal when she said she couldn't stop crying. By the time he reached the notebook, his hand was no longer steady. "What is all this for?" he asked quietly. Hannah glanced toward the bassinet. Emma still slept untouched by the tension in the room. "It's for the moment you came back and acted like this house had been waiting for you." Evan looked at her, then really looked. For the first time since he had walked in, there was no easy confidence left in his face. No practiced charm. No assumption that words would smooth the edges once he found the right tone. "I didn't think you'd do this," he said. And there it was. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong." Only surprise that she had stopped making his choices survivable. Hannah held his gaze. "That was your mistake." He swallowed hard, eyes moving once more over the boxes, the papers, the notebook, then finally to the bassinet by the window. Emma shifted in her sleep, one tiny fist opening and closing again. When he looked back at Hannah, something in him had changed. Not enough, but enough to know he had come home too late to the version of her he thought would still be standing here. The house was quiet again by Wednesday morning. Not the fragile quiet Hannah had learned to endure during the weeks Evan was gone. This one was different, grounded, defined. Evan had slept in the guest room, not because she told him to, because there had been no space left for him anywhere else. Hannah stood at the kitchen counter, the same place she had stood the day before, but nothing about it felt the same now. The papers were no longer spread out. The folder sat closed, aligned neatly beside the notebook. Emma was awake in this bassinet, blinking slowly at the light. Behind her, she heard Evan step into the room. His movement was quieter than usual, as if he understood now that volume wouldn't help him. "Hannah," he said. She didn't turn right away. Not out of defiance, out of control. When she did face him, his posture had changed. The edges were gone. What remained wasn't confidence. It was caution. "I've been thinking," he said. She nodded once. "Good." He hesitated, then continued. "I didn't handle this right." It wasn't an apology, but it was closer than anything he had offered before. Hannah watched him carefully. "That's not specific enough," she said. The words weren't sharp, just exact. Evan swallowed, his gaze dropping briefly to the counter, then back to her. "I left when you needed me," he said. "I treated it like it wasn't serious, and I shouldn't have touched the account like that after you told me what you needed." There it was. Not everything, but enough to stand on. Hannah let the silence sit for a moment, long enough for the weight of his words to settle without interruption. "And now?" she asked. Evan exhaled slowly. "Now I fix it." Hannah shook her head once. "No," she said. "Now you follow it." He frowned slightly. The structure she clarified, gesturing lightly toward the folder. "The account stays monitored. The expenses stay documented. No withdrawals without agreement. Not from you, not from me." Evan didn't interrupt. "That's not punishment," she added. "That's baseline." He nodded slower this time. "Okay." Hannah studied him for a moment longer. "And the rest?" he asked. She looked toward Emma, who had begun to move her hands more actively, her small fingers opening and closing against the air. "The rest is time," Hannah said. Evan didn't speak. He seemed to understand that this part wouldn't be negotiated in a single conversation. "I want to stay," he said quietly. Hannah met his eyes. "Then you stay under reality," she replied. No raised voice, no anger, just a boundary that didn't need reinforcement. Evan nodded again this time, without hesitation. Across the room, Emma let out a small, insistent sound. Hannah moved to her, lifting her gently, settling her against her shoulder with the same practiced motion she had learned over the past month. Evan watched, not stepping forward, not assuming, just watching. It was a small thing, but it was different. The morning light filled the room, catching on the edges of the boxes, that still lined the wall. They hadn't been moved yet. They didn't need to be. Not everything had to return to where it was. Some things would stay changed. Hannah walked to the window with Emma in her arms, looking out at the street that had continued without interruption through everything. A neighbor passed by. A car slowed at the corner. Life moved the same way it always had. But inside the house, something had shifted into place. Not perfect, not complete, but stable. Hannah rested her cheek lightly against Emma's head. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt steady. And for the first time since Evan had left, that was enough. Behind her, she heard him begin to move, quietly, carefully, picking up one of the boxes, reading the label, before deciding where it belonged. Not undoing, not erasing, just adjusting. And that was where it would begin.